two black guys loitering in the street, definitely some filthy scum plotting something vile. One's a welfare leech, the other's got the face of a criminal fresh out of jail. You dare challenge the police? The racist voice spat from the mouth of a self-proclaimed arbiter of justice. Logan and David were just standing there talking, but Briggs arrested them. In a split second, blood stained the sidewalk. David collapsed, dead, but they didn't know. Logan, a former Delta Force. The pull of the trigger ignited a fire of rage. Will the story's end deliver fitting punishment? Which state are you in? I want to know how far my story can reach. Drop in a comment. The early morning sunlight pierced through the thin clouds, shining down on the old rooftops along the suburban streets, where life moved slowly and silently like an old film reel. In the deteriorating three-story apartment complex, the door of room 12 swung open. Logan Carter stepped out, wearing a charcoal t-shirt that hugged his muscular frame, holding a chipped coffee mug. Behind him followed David Carter, his twin brother, walking with a relaxed gait and a face always carrying a hint of cheerfulness. They were born at the same hour and grew up under the same roof, yet lived two opposing ways of life. Logan was quiet, with deep, unreadable eyes and rare words that made listeners think. David was different, jovial, talkative, often teasing neighbors with harmless jokes and friendly pats on the shoulder. Their lives revolved around unspoken routines. 6 a.m. was exercise time, 7 a.m. was grocery shopping, and 8 a.m. was work time. Logan seldom talked about his job. When asked, he only shrugged, saying he was a strategy consultant for a security company. David knew this was untrue, but never pressed him. There was something in Logan's eyes that only those who had witnessed war could understand. David worked at a mechanic shop near Bridge 9, a manual labor job that was steady and modestly paid, but valued because it allowed him to live close to the community he loved. Each evening, they sat down to dinner together, speaking little, but their presence was enough. The neighborhood they lived in was usually peaceful, but in recent weeks, rumors had spread about a drug gang operating in the area. After a recent raid, local police immediately increased checks and surveillance in neighborhoods where black residents lived. Suspicious glances appeared whenever someone in a hoodie or carrying a large bag walked through the town center. David once joked he should stick a sign on his back reading, "I'm just a mechanic," to avoid suspicion, but Logan didn't laugh. He only stared out the window, eyes calculating something invisible. That morning, they left the nearby grocery store, each carrying several bags filled with milk, bread, and canned goods. The street was sparse, with only a few elderly people watering plants on their porches. The sun was already blazing, casting the brothers' long shadows over cracked sidewalks. David glanced at Logan and cheekily said, "Let's go watch a movie tonight. There's an action film you'll surely say is illogical." Logan didn't answer, but his lips curved into a rare, slight smile. As they turned onto the main street, Logan slowed down. His instincts, honed by leading many military campaigns, detected something strange. A police car parked across the street with tinted windows, but he clearly saw two figures inside watching them. David kept walking, unaware, even whistling a familiar tune. Logan said nothing but quickly glanced at the license plate, then casually looked toward the nearby shop window. He wasn't afraid, yet an uneasy feeling stirred within, as if the ground beneath them had just trembled lightly, warning that something was about to erupt. A brief patrol car siren sounded, too soft to attract the whole street's attention, but enough to make Logan freeze mid-step. The car doors swung open, and two uniformed police officers stepped out, their eyes scanning from head to toe with a scrutinizing gaze. The taller man in front was Briggs, with blonde hair cut short, a crooked smile as if he had just found what he was looking for. Behind him came Reynolds, right hand always resting on his gun grip, head slightly bowed but eyes sharp as knives. Logan turned slightly and pulled David to a stop. David frowned, his voice curt as he saw the two officers crossing the street toward them. Briggs spoke first, his tone even but commanding. "Where are you two headed? Let me check your bags." David halted and narrowed his eyes. "We just bought some groceries. Is there a problem?" Briggs didn't bother answering immediately. Reynolds stepped forward, reaching for the plastic bag David held without asking or permission. David stepped back. "Don't touch my stuff. Do you have a search warrant?" The advanced voice was harsh. "Shut up. You don't have the right to question me." 2 black men carrying big bags around here during a drug investigation? Do you think I need a reason?" David's expression shifted from irritation to anger. Logan recognized that fire in his brother's eyes, the instinctive reaction of someone who had endured too much injustice. Logan stepped between them, voice low and firm. "We haven't done anything wrong. You are overstepping your bounds." Briggs glanced at Logan, then signaled Reynolds to proceed with the search. Reynolds approached and deliberately touched David's body as a test of limits. 2 black men gathering on the street. Nothing good will come of this. One looks like a bum, the other like he just got out of jail. Are you planning to resist the cops? David angrily slapped his hand away. "I said, don't touch me." The atmosphere changed in a heartbeat. Reynolds recoiled, face twisted. He pulled out a metal baton, flicking it open with a swift snap. Simultaneously, Briggs drew his gun from its holster, barrel pointed at the ground, but his finger was already on the trigger. The brothers instinctively took a step back. Logan lightly touched David's shoulder, eyes never leaving the gun. "Stay calm, it's not worth it," he said softly but clearly. Around them, a few windows began to crack open. An elderly woman hid behind a curtain, phone trembling in her hand. A man at the bakery across the street raised his camera, eyes fixed and unblinking. Whispered murmurs spread, vague and anxious. "Here we go again, just like last time." Briggs stepped closer, his hateful eyes locked on David as if he were prey to be subdued. "You're resisting an officer. Want more charges?" David raised both hands, dropping the bag. Briggs rolled out a carton of milk crushed slightly underfoot. His hands were high, but his eyes were stone cold. Within that gaze lay resentment, bitterness, helplessness, and the remaining pride after years of living right but still being treated like a criminal. Logan saw the change in his brother's eyes, but saw even clearly the gun rising inch by inch. No one moved or breathed heavily. Only the burning sun poured down, the ceiling fan in the grocery store spinning slowly like a whirlpool with no escape. In that frozen moment, Briggs tilted his head, stepped half a step closer, then leaned in and whispered through clenched teeth, "Not cooperating? Let's see how long you last." His eyes never left David's hands, finger tightening slightly, heavy like a death warning. Logan knew what was coming, but time would not let him stop it. Everything was about to cross the line. The space seemed drained of all sound. The wind was still, the street empty except for the hurried footsteps of curious onlookers who had just turned the corner, their eyes fixed on the 2 black men standing surrounded by police. David still held his hands high, the 2 bags fallen at his feet, his breath heavy with anger and helplessness. Logan stood close by, his cold eyes locked onto the gun in Briggs's hand. In that brief moment, he could hear the pounding of his own pulse in his temples, each beat tense like a string about to snap. Briggs stepped forward, aiming the gun straight at David's chest. His voice rang harsh, heavy like a hammer striking the pavement. "Get down." David glanced quickly at Logan, then back at the officer with a look mixing pride and disbelief. Kneeling in the street, under countless eyes fixed on him as if he were a criminal, was something he refused to accept. He shook his head, feet unmoving. Briggs narrowed his eyes, as if just waiting for that. Reynolds came up from behind, pretending to check safety, but suddenly yanked David's arm hard. David lost balance, staggered a half step, then straightened himself reflexively. That was all Briggs needed. He shouted, hands on the gun, and squeezed the trigger. A sharp crack shattered the thickening air. The bullet struck David's chest directly. Blood sprang like a red streak, drawn across the harsh morning light. David collapsed like a tree cut down at the trunk. His eyes widened, unable to believe what was happening, lips trembling as if trying to utter some words. His hand raised mid-air, flailing as if grasping for support, then froze just short of reaching his brother. Logan screamed, lunging forward but was blocked by Reynolds with a baton swing across the shoulder. He staggered back, David's blood splattering his hand and shirt, touching memories he thought had been buried after years of war. Logan shouted his brother's name in a howl of helplessness. The crowd erupted. A woman cried out, and an elderly person knelt on the sidewalk holding their head, murmuring, "Not again, Lord." A young man threw his phone at the police, hands trembling. "He didn't do anything," someone yelled, voice choked with panic. Briggs stepped back 2 paces. still holding his gun, face pale but eyes trying to maintain control. He yelled, "Dangerous situation! Suspect attacked!" His voice was trembling slightly, but trying to suppress the rising crowd. Reynolds pressed the radio to his ear, calling for backup, eyes scanning the crowd, filming them, grip tightening on the baton. On the pavement, David struggled to breathe. Blood poured from his mouth, flowing down his cheek, spreading a stain on the gray cement. Logan dropped to his knees, crawling toward his brother, restrained but eyes never leaving David's pale face. "He's unarmed!" he screamed, voice raw as if tearing his throat apart. "He has nothing!" David whispered a weak call, like the wind. Then his eyes blurred. His fingers that once reached toward Logan fell lifelessly, cold. Logan's shadow covered his brother's body, his face hardened, breath lost in a broken scream amidst the chaotic street. Rage began to build behind those eyes, silent, deep, and as cold as a blade, freshly stained with blood. Logan lunged at David instinctively, shoving Reynolds aside. He knelt in the middle of the road, cradling his brother's bloodied body. David's hand was still warm, his eyes half open, as if unable to accept the separation. Logan bent close, shouting his familiar name one last time, his voice breaking in the heavy atmosphere of horror. But the moment lasted only an instant. Briggs dragged Logan off the street roughly, pulling him hard backward. Logan resisted, but before he could turn, the shove sent him face first onto the sidewalk. His forehead slammed against the edge of the concrete, blood spilling, spreading a red stain among the old dirt marks. His vision blurred briefly, then snapped open wide, locking onto the image of David lying motionless just steps away. Logan's whole body twitched as he tried to crawl toward his brother, but a knee pressed hard into his back, crushing all remaining resistance. Reynolds pressed down, breathing heavily as if Logan were a wild animal escaped from its cage. Briggs stepped forward and kicked Logan sharply in the calf, causing a sharp pain. Under the pressure of two men, Logan felt his chest crushed, but his eyes stayed fixed on David. Blood from his forehead ran down his cheek, mixing with dust and sweat, cooling with each forced breath. Shouts around them grew louder. A middle-aged man rushed forward, voice strained like a taut string. "Stop! You're killing an innocent man!" New officers arrived, raising their hands to hold him back, pushing him away from the scene. A young man in the crowd live-streamed while shouting, "They shot an unarmed man. Now they're beating the one still alive." The sound of handcuffs clicked sharply. Logan's hands were twisted behind his back, wrists locked tightly in cold metal cuffs. Another officer pressed his head down to the ground. Logan's eyes widened, fixed silently on David's body. His limbs went stiff, but deep in his gaze something was stirring, a silent fury. Logan was pulled upright in handcuffs, blood still dripping, clothes disheveled, but he didn't care. He was forced to turn his head toward his brother, now completely still, lips pale, blood from his mouth spreading a dark stain on the sidewalk. Beside him was a torn shopping bag and milk spilled onto the ground. Logan wanted to scream, to break free, but his body was still as stone, all life force drained from his muscles, concentrated in eyes blazing red from pain. Briggs approached, leaning close to Reynolds and whispering, "Handle this quickly, call the handlers." An ambulance arrived, silently like death itself. Two paramedics stepped out, speaking little, simply bowed to check for a pulse and then shook their heads. A white sheet was spread out, covering David's body. The wind whistled softly past the eaves of the nearby row houses. Logan stood still, hands cuffed, face smeared with blood, his eyes turning cold gray. Deep in those eyes, something had been ignited. He said no more. His facial muscles relaxed, but veins throbbed at his temples. Within that silence lay a vow, unspoken, yet sharp as a blade. A strong wind blew through the street, lifting the corner of the white sheet covering David's body. Logan stared unblinking at his brother's face, still bowed low, unmoving. His whole body trembled slightly, not from pain but from rage, from blood debt, from a justice shot dead in broad daylight, right on the land where they should have lived as humans. The second-floor apartment at the corner of McRobb Street was usually quiet each morning. Henry Moore, a man in his 40s, lived alone with two collie dogs dogs named Baxter and June. Both dogs often ran circles around the small balcony whenever Henry opened the glass door while he sipped coffee, silently watching the street where he had lived for nearly 10 years. As a veterinarian at the clinic at the neighborhood's entrance, Henry was calm and rarely involved in neighborhood conversations, yet everyone acknowledged he had healing hands and a heart gentle enough to soothe even the fiercest animals. Henry carried two bloodlines. His mother was Korean-American, and his father was an Irish truck driver. His childhood was marked by many encounters with strange looks and subtle teasing from peers. Despite excellent academic achievements, Henry often had to prove his worth simply because of his unusual name and single-lidded eyes. That experience made him highly sensitive to discrimination. He chose veterinary medicine to avoid the complexities of human society, but always held a deep belief that no one deserved to be treated like an animal. That morning, Henry was feeding his two dogs when he heard a police siren below. Normally, he would have ignored it, but something compelled him to step out onto the balcony and look down at the narrow street lined with old two-story houses. Logan and David Carter were being stopped by two police officers. From his second-floor vantage point, Henry saw every gesture, glance, and the way Reynolds' hand rested on his weapon. He stepped back inside, quickly grabbed his phone, returned to the balcony, turned on the camera, and began recording. At first, he intended only to record as a precaution, a defensive habit from witnessing many cases buried due to a lack of evidence. But when he saw the gun drawn, he held his breath, clutching the phone tightly. His body tensed like a stretched string as Briggs shouted something loudly, and a sharp sound echoed. The bullet tore through the morning air. Henry staggered back a step, nearly dropping his phone. He struggled to keep it steady. The camera kept rolling, capturing David Carter, collapsing in the street like a disassembled doll. Mogan screamed. A crowd began to gather and shouts echoed through the neighborhood. Henry watched the scene, his hands gripping the railing until they turned white. He knew he had just witnessed something irreversible, and he also knew he had recorded what many hoped no one would capture. When Logan was pinned down, handcuffed, and forced to watch his brother's body, Henry stepped back inside, carefully locked the door, then sank onto the cold floor. In the quiet room, only the hum of the air conditioner and Baxter's soft scratching at the door broke the silence. Henry replayed the video he had just recorded. The phone screen glowed brightly in the dark room. Sitting motionless on a wooden chair beside his desk, Henry's eyes fixed on the video rewound to the beginning. The footage started with two officers crossing the street. Briggs' voice rang out coldly, somewhat provocative, pushing the tension tight like a taut wire. Reynolds said nothing, only keeping his hand on his weapon, moving slowly and encircling the targets as if preparing to hunt. In the middle segment, Henry witnessed something he could never forget. Reynolds suddenly grabbed David's arm, causing him to lose balance. Briggs shouted, "Hands on the gun!" and immediately pulled the trigger. The sound boomed. The image wavered slightly as Henry's hand trembled while filming, but the blood spatter, David collapsing, and Logan rushing forward were all clear. A lump formed in Henry's throat as he watched that fall, as if someone had suddenly ripped a person out of the world with legalized coldness. The final segment showed Logan pinned face down on the pavement, hands cuffed behind his back. His voice was hoarse with despair, repeatedly calling David's name as if trying to awaken a soul just departed. Residents shouted. A man standing in front of a barber shop screamed in protest, while Reynolds forced Logan's face into the ground. The second-floor angle was high and clear, daylight sharp enough to reveal everything like living evidence, and replaced the phone on the desk, his hands shaking. A surge of disgust rose to his throat as he replayed the moment Briggs shouted false orders to justify the fatal shot. Both tone and gaze in that moment showed Briggs knew exactly what he was doing. Henry took a deep breath, clasped his hands, and fixed on the paused frame showing blood spreading on the sidewalk. He thought of David's mother, of those who had witnessed loved ones fall in the street without anyone daring to stand up because the evidence was too weak or too easily erased. He also thought of news stories where key witnesses later disappeared or were silenced by fear. But that understanding made him realize that if he remained silent, He was no different from the man who pulled the trigger. Henry plugged a USB drive into his computer and backed up the video. Then he opened an encryption program, uploaded a copy to a locked storage platform labeled private. On the screen, the progress bar advanced by percentages, like a heartbeat pounding in his chest. Next to it, an email draft was open, a message explaining the evidence and containing a secure link to the clip. The recipient's name had yet to be filled in. He was still deciding. Henry opened his phone and typed into a secure messaging app. He remembered a reporter in the black community whose articles he had read. He wrote a brief message saying he had evidence of a civilian shooting and wanted to share it, but did not send it yet. The screen stayed open, the cursor blinking as if urging him to choose. He wanted to know who was truly trustworthy, who would not betray someone stepping out of the shadows. The sound of an engine came from afar. White headlights swept across the second-floor curtains, casting Henry's silhouette sitting at the desk onto the opposite wall. He did not move. His eyes followed the light, sliding across every corner of the room before fading away. A shiver ran down his spine. Henry lifted the phone, rewound to the exact frame of Briggs pulling the trigger, then paused. The screen's light reflected in his dark brown eyes. His hand slowly moved to the private share button. A single thought echoed in his mind. If I stay silent, I am part of the crime. His lips pressed tightly, his gaze fierce. At that moment, Henry Moore was no longer a reclusive veterinarian. He was the bearer of evidence that could change everything. Logan sat motionless in the circle of people, blood from his forehead streaming down his cheek, gradually soaking into his dark collar. His hands were still cuffed, wrists reddened from the tight restraint. Around him, the gasps, shouts, and outrage from the community echoed off the walls of what had once been a peaceful neighborhood. Some recorded with their phones, others stood frozen in disbelief at what they had just witnessed. David's death was still imprinted on the cracked sidewalk, the blood not yet dry. Briggs tried to maintain order by shouting and ordering the nearby crowd to step back. Reynolds stood beside him, breathing heavily, sweat pouring from both temples. Holding a radio, he kept calling for backup, but his voice began to tremble. None of them expected the situation to spiral so far out of control, nor were they prepared for what was coming next. A crackling sound came from the radio, first intermittent, then clearer. McRae Unit, this is Central Command. Priority state-level call. Request direct connection to the team leader at the scene. Briggs spun around, grabbing the radio. His eyes filled with confusion. Such a call rarely got routed to the unit, especially in a remote town, rarely under scrutiny. "This is Team Leader Briggs," he answered cautiously. A voice on the other end spoke decisively and coldly. "I am Colonel Holland from the State Security Office. Emergency order. Release immediately the man you have just handcuffed. Name, Logan Carter." Briggs' mouth opened, but before he could respond, the voice continued without pause. "If you do not comply within 3 minutes, the entire McRae unit will face administrative investigation for abuse of power and violation of protocol in handling an unarmed target. This is not a warning." The radio went silent. Briggs froze, fingers gripping the radio tightly. His eyes darted to Logan, then to Reynolds, as if seeking confirmation that he hadn't misheard. Reynolds stared at the radio, his face paling, whispering, "They know his name. They called his exact name." Logan remained seated, cuffed behind his back, head slightly raised, eyes fixed on Briggs. There was no pain, no panic, only a cold calmness, heavy as stone. Briggs stepped back half a pace, his back slick with sweat. There was something about the man before him that made him uneasy, as if he had just provoked a fierce beast pretending to be wounded. "Remove the cuffs," Briggs muttered reluctantly. Reynolds hesitated, but then withdrew the key and unlocked the handcuffs. Logan slowly stood, saying nothing. He raised his hand to wipe the blood from his forehead. The crowd murmured, and a woman exclaimed, "Who is he that they order his immediate release?" A young man muttered, "This is beyond ordinary now." Logan glanced back once more at David's silent body, lying under a thin cloth, a final look, allowing no interruptions. Then he walked past Briggs without a glance or a word. The anger within him had crystallized into resolute silence. Briggs watched him go, lips pressed tightly together. The atmosphere around the scene seemed to have been drained. What he thought was under his control had veered in a direction neither he nor Reynolds anticipated. Deep inside, a quiet fear crept in, as he realized the system he trusted to be invulnerable had just been shaken by one name, and that wind had not stopped. No sooner had the cuffs been unclasped than Briggs spun around, punching the patrol car hard enough to draw blood from his knuckles. He said nothing, teeth clenched, face flushed with a mix of anger and confusion. Logan walked through the eyes of dozens, calm, upright, as if untouched by anything. But it was that very silence that broke Briggs' control. He knew he had lost. He had been forced to release the man in front of countless cameras, before a town that, just minutes ago, lay in the palm of his hand. Reynolds leaned against the car, sweat soaking his back. He watched Logan retreat, then turned to Briggs, voice barely holding back panic. What did we just do? Why did the release order come so fast? Who is he that makes the whole state step in? Briggs didn't answer, his eyes drifting to the scene where David still lay, the white cloth gently lifted by the wind at a corner. A sharp pang rose in his chest, the dared not name. Reynolds stepped closer, voice lower. We should rewrite the report, block some details, say David resisted, remove cameras if necessary. Briggs shook his head, irritated, kicking the tire. Erase the scene completely, now, before the investigators arrive. His voice dropped but could not hide his disorientation. What he once proudly called control, the police power in a small town, now felt more fragile than ever. A young officer from the team approached, phone in hand, whispering, "I checked the call logs just now. The number belongs to the Federal Strategic Security Office, sir." Briggs stood silently for several seconds, hands clenched until veins bulged. He slowly turned, looking in the direction Logan had left, but his figure had already blended into the crowd. His face paled as if he had just glimpsed his own future, scarred by a thin streak of blood on white paper. Amid the dispersing footsteps of the townspeople, Logan walked away without a word. His face was expressionless, except for a glance toward Briggs before turning down another street. That look sent a shiver down Reynolds. He whispered, "That look was a warning of a storm we don't know where it's coming from." Briggs spat on the ground, but the gesture could not mask the uncontrollable rage swelling inside him. "Who is this guy that shakes the whole system?" Reynolds answered softly, eyes fixed on the empty space. "If he's not a criminal, then he's something even more terrifying." The radio inside the car buzzed again. Briggs grabbed it, pressed it to his ear, nodded a few times, then fell silent. The voice on the other end demanded a detailed report on the event involving an individual named Logan Carter. The caller claimed to be from the Emergency Coordination Office, offering no explanation but insisting that all data be submitted by the end of the day. Briggs tightened his grip on the radio, lips pressed into a straight line, eyes closing briefly before opening again. "He's someone we shouldn't mess with." The patrol car doors closed. The engine started, but neither Briggs nor Reynolds spoke. In the cramped cabin, the atmosphere was so heavy that one could hear every breath. Power, once confidently wielded like a silent blade, was now bent by a single name. Ahead, they knew, there would be no peace. Logan Carter was not disappearing. He was preparing for something they could not control, and within the hearts of two armed men, a fragile feeling appeared for the first time. A small apartment on the third floor lay silent among the old rows of houses in McRobb. Logan pushed open the door, took off his blood-stained, dusty shoes and placed them by the bookshelf, then walked straight into the bathroom. He peeled off his blood-splattered shirt, ran water over the wound on his forehead, each touch burning his skin more deeply, his eyes growing even darker. The mirror reflected the image of a man who had lost part of his soul, yet his gaze remained unwavering. Logan said nothing, standing still as water trickled down both temples, carrying the aftershocks of a shattering truth. The phone on the table vibrated. The caller ID read Cole, a name Logan had not heard in 2 years. He dried his hands and answered. Cole's voice came through immediately, without beating around the bush. "Your identity has been exposed. The Strategic Security Office contacted the local police directly. They've triggered a federal alert. Do you know what this means?" Logan leaned against the wall, his eyes fixed on the mirror opposite. "I know," he replied tersely, his voice hoarse. Cole continued, slowly and heavily. "Logan Carter, Senior Delta Force Operator, former commander of Operation Golden Trident, marked for elimination by 3 Middle Eastern countries. Internal code name Black Saber. Recipient of the Special Service Medal, holder of Level 4 security clearance, and now you are the man who was just handcuffed by a small-town police officer in the street for suspicious behavior." Logan remained silent. He neither denied nor defended himself. His story was a sealed dossier for nearly a decade. Bloody campaigns, counterattacks on the African border, covert negotiations in disputed waters, all bore his name, though never appearing in public news. After a leaked operation sparked fierce diplomatic controversy, Logan chose to withdraw, relocating to McRobb with his brother David. He never explained why he left the military, never revealed his identity, not even to his closest. His silence was to protect, not to conceal. At the same time, hundreds of miles away in a government office, Logan's secret files were pulled from archives. An official was startled to see his name appear in the state police report. An internal memo, leaked to military movement forums, raised questions among analysts. Some senior officers demanded immediate protection for Logan from the media. Others feared that if the truth were uncovered, the entire system's image would be severely damaged. Cole warned further, "The surveillance system has just triggered a full reverse trace on media reports. Your name is being filtered. We might have only days left to control this." Logan stayed silent, his gaze darkening. "A retired lieutenant general just called headquarters. They ordered you to keep your files confidential for 72 hours. After that, it depends on developments." The room gradually darkened as evening fell. Logan sat on an old wooden chair, holding a small photo frame with a printout of David's picture from the grocery store printer. His brother's face still smiled, still looking straight into the lens as if nothing had happened. Logan remembered cold nights on the battlefield where gunfire did not shake him as much as a message from his brother. He once believed he had done enough to protect those he loved, but today all that faith was strangled by a bullet. He looked up, staring at his reflection on the glass door. His voice lowered almost a breath. "They will know who I am, but that's not the scariest part." Then he put the frame down, stood and walked toward the metal cabinet where things untouched since his battlefield days were stored, and now they would no longer lie dormant. At the McRabb police station, the atmosphere froze after a young officer whispered in Briggs's ear that Logan Carter was a Delta Force operative. The news leaked by a military insider threw the room into unprecedented tension. Briggs leaned on the table, ruffling his hair, eyes unsettled. Reynolds sat dumbfounded, lips moving but unable to speak. They realized they had provoked something beyond control. A man who had led top-secret operations now stood in this small town, watching their every move. Worse still, the man whose brother had been shot dead. Briggs snapped, "We must keep this quiet." Reynolds, pale-faced, replied quietly, "If he doesn't press charges, he's preparing something worse." Since the state-level call, they knew they no longer controlled the situation. Under the meeting room's lights, those who once believed power was theirs now felt only fear and survival instinct. In the neighborhood, small stories began resurfacing. Logan, the quiet man in the third-floor apartment, often left early and never spoke about work. An old neighbor named Fletcher recalled a time he fell off his bike and Logan appeared briefly, treating the wound so quickly he thought he had been saved by a military medic. A grocer told of a break-in, and the thief caught at the bus station the next day carried a crudely written note, "Be careful next time." At that time, no one understood what had happened, but now they were connecting the clues. The rumor that Logan was a Delta Force commander spread fast like wildfire. In the cafe, chatter never ceased. Some admired, some feared. An elderly white woman whispered, "Maybe that's why his eyes always look like they're scanning a battlefield." The townsfolk began to look at Logan differently, with both respect and caution. They realized they had lived beside someone who understood war and sacrifice more than anyone. In the small apartment, Lona, Logan's girlfriend, stood silently, watching him change the bandage. She asked little, only wiping blood from his wrist gently. Her voice was soft, but firm. "What do I need to know to go with you from now on?" Logan did not answer immediately. He quietly pulled out a file from the drawer and handed it to her. Most of the pages were blacked out, but his name, the names of operations, and phrases like "top secret" were clear. Lona took it without further questions. That night, several unfamiliar men parked at the end of Logan's row of houses. They did not step out, but their eyes behind dark glasses tracked every movement. At the local administration office, a series of unexplained personnel transfers were issued. An office worker who witnessed Logan's arrest was also summoned for questioning. Logan stood on the balcony, eyes fixed into the distance. He understood that anonymity was over, but the truth was not just one man's story. David's death had torn apart the mask covering the system. What was coming was not just personal revenge, but a wake-up call to those who believed the law was in the hands of the powerful. And Logan, once known as Black Saber, would remind them that justice sometimes does not come from courts, but from those who survive the shadows of war. Under the blinding spotlight of the media, the name James George suddenly became the focus of every headline. Less than a day after David Carter's death, major and minor television stations simultaneously reported on a new suspect linked to the drug trafficking network in McRae. The first images of James appeared with fierce eyes, a shaved head, tattoos sprawling from his neck down to his arms, evoking the typical white criminal figure seen in crime news. A reporter standing in front of the police station declared confidently, "This is the suspect law enforcement is pursuing, and it is very likely that last night's incident was a mistake made during the chase." James's background was quickly revealed piece by various sources. He had been arrested previously for possession of synthetic drugs, illegal firearms trafficking, and witness intimidation in a case last year. Although once wanted by the DEA, James abruptly disappeared from the radar for over 6 months. Now he reappeared at the exact right time and place near where David was shot, as if every step had been scripted beforehand. Several blurry videos were uploaded online, showing a man resembling James walking past a street near the scene before the incident. Alongside these was an anonymous witness quoted as saying, "James often frequented that area to deal with some young black guy." Although these details remained unverified, the media raced to create sensational headlines, turning James George into the centerpiece of a calculated media campaign. Evening news headlines like "Primary Suspect Identified in the Case" and "Fatal Mistake Between Victim and Perpetrator" appeared repeatedly. Some commentators even softened their tone, suggesting that the police were simply doing their duty amid the tension of a crackdown operation. Notably, several ambiguous articles hinted at a connection between Logan and James. They wrote that Logan had once lived in that neighborhood and had met James at a local gas station. Other articles quoted unidentified neighbors, implying that the two Black brothers might be unintended links caught in the situation. All speculation failed to lead to concrete conclusions, but it was enough to sow doubt. The truth quietly receded, making way for the noise of a deliberate media campaign. Outside, the public began to divide. Some believed the incident was merely an accident during the pursuit of a dangerous criminal, while others felt insulted by how the media twisted the story. An angry Black mother posted on social media, "My son is not a shadow for you to compare with a drug dealer." Those voices were quickly drowned out by articles steering public opinion toward the possibility that, just maybe, everything had gone astray due to coincidence. At the end of each news segment, James George appeared as the perfect scapegoat, a villain constructed to divert all attention. As the media storm continued to swirl, a lingering question echoed beneath every line of text. Could it be that the name James George was being used as a fresh coat of paint to cover the blood of an innocent man? Amid the flood of news about James George, social media began to shake in another direction. Some McRae residents and netizens questioned the unusual coincidence between David Carter's shooting and the sudden appearance of a perfect suspect like James. Eyewitnesses to the event or viewers of leaked clips started to speak out. A group of civil rights activists swiftly launched the Justice for David campaign. Within 6 hours, over 1 million shares, spread across platforms, demanding the release of the police body cam footage. However, a strange phenomenon occurred. Several posts about David were tagged as violations of community guidelines and disappeared within minutes. Many accounts reported their posts being shadow banned or removed without explanation. This stirred public outrage. A famous commentator wrote, "When justice needs light, invisible hands switch off the lamp." Meanwhile, news about James George topped keyword rankings, was broadcast repeatedly on national television and saturated cable news channels. Phrases like emergency situation, dangerous suspect, and drug crackdown gradually replaced controversial shooting or death of a young black man. Independent investigative reports were overwhelmed by pieces from major outlets. The rare articles mentioning David Carter were pushed to the bottom of search results, making the information fade. In the shadow of this distraction campaign, an anonymous letter appeared in Logan's email inbox. "Stop before things go beyond the limit. James is only the tip." Logan read it repeatedly, not out of fear but because it confirmed his every instinct. At the same time, Henry, the veterinarian who had recorded video from his balcony, discovered his home security camera had been disabled for several minutes at midnight. His computer booted slowly and his hard drive was inspected without authorization. He knew he was being watched, but then an independent media channel called Torchlight Report unexpectedly aired a special investigative episode. They revisited James George's past and discovered that in a drug case 3 years prior, he was caught with clear evidence but was released without transparent reasons. An anonymous former investigator affirmed, "He is a pawn. They use James whenever they need to clean up a troublesome case with no suspicion." The episode was quickly shared by the community, fueling rising waves of suspicion. In that context, Logan Carter stepped out of silence. Before Torchlight Report's camera, he publicly revealed his identity for the first time, a Delta Force commander who had led secret missions in the Middle East. A man once erased from civilian records by the government. His eyes stared directly into the lens, his voice calm but heavy like a hammer blow. "They don't want you looking at David's death because that death shakes this system. James is the curtain. The truth is the blood still wet." When those words ended, a new fierce wave began to surge across America, not because of James, but because of Logan, who no longer remained silent. Under the dim light, Logan's apartment became so silent that every breath he took echoed like a sound in a vast, empty space. He closed the door firmly and stepped into the familiar room, which now felt as cold as a funeral parlor. The blood-stained shoes still bore dark red smears, and the torn shoulder of David's shirt hung loosely over a chair. Logan did not change clothes, did not touch his phone, did not eat or drink. He sat there, back against the chair, eyes facing the temporary photo of David placed on the table, guilt clinging to him like an incurable fever. In the silence, his mind returned to childhood days in the countryside where little David used to grab his hand going to school, where he sat watching Logan practice martial arts in the backyard. Memories played like a slow film reel, showing laughter, foolish quarrels, and David's gaze when he first learned that Logan enlisted. Logan had survived deadly campaigns in Iraq, Syria, and Somalia, bringing soldiers back intact from fire zones. Yet now, facing his brother's death, he felt more useless than ever. He suddenly stood up, punching the right wall hard. Blood oozed from his knuckles, dripping onto the floor beside David's shirt. This blood was not from a distant battle, but from his own stifled rage, where his trust was crushed. Logan had once believed justice existed, that the civil system would protect the innocent. But now everything before him was a bloody charade, staged to cover the truth and protect those who stained the law with blood. He turned on his phone, replaying the video recorded by Henry. Each time Briggs drew his gun and pulled the trigger, Logan clenched his fist tightly. No tears, no trembling. He just watched and whispered, "I have spared you all." It was not a regret. It was a warning. Logan knew all previous leniency had ended. He walked to the wooden cabinet, opened the door, and took out an old military jacket. Carefully, he hung it on the front door as a symbol. Then he turned to the bedroom, opened the safe, and took out old documents, military ID cards, and a handgun legally registered from his active duty days. In the deepest compartment, he pulled out a black ring engraved with the Delta Force logo, the inseparable emblem of those trained for no mercy. Logan slipped it onto his left hand and stood before David's photo. "I don't want to come back, but now I have no choice." Night began to rain. Drops tapped steadily on the window pane. Logan put on his combat boots, slung on a military bag, and zipped up decisively. Carrying little, he knew what he needed was not weapons, but the truth, the resolve to force the system to face what it had created. He stood at the door, the yellow light casting his shadow on the hallway floor. A strong wind swept through, gently fluttering the jacket on the door. Logan glanced at it, then stepped out, eyes fixed toward the end of the street where the police headquarters stood. His steps grew heavier, not from fear, but from the silent oath he carried. His voice echoed in his head, deep and cold. "If you want to live in darkness, you must learn to open your eyes wide." Logan drove through the night, leaving town, heading toward the suburbs, where a small Special Forces base had once stood. Though now disbanded, he still kept a secret entrance that had been a tactical archive and an independent backup system for top-secret missions. When the steel door opened, a weak sensor light illuminated a thin layer of dust on the equipment tables. Two figures emerged from the shadows: Mason, an information warfare specialist, and Rios, formerly in charge of domestic intelligence surveillance. Neither asked questions. They knew Logan's return meant something more serious than the battlefield. Logan placed a stack of documents on the table. The video Henry recorded, a copy of David's forensic medical report, communications orders from the state level, and an extract from James George's records. He sorted them by group and marked risk levels. Important files were additionally encrypted and paired with separate access codes. Rios glanced over and silently nodded. Mason was more thoughtful before saying, "If they really want to silence you, a traffic accident is the most common choice." Logan did not reply, continuing his work methodically as if orchestrating a field operation. He prepared 3 encrypted data copies, sending them to trusted contacts in 3 different cities. Each envelope contained instructions. "If I go missing or die under suspicious circumstances, forward this to the press and the International Human Rights Union." Logan handwrote an encrypted letter to a former judge who had been dismissed after exposing police coercion. He requested legal advice and a ready appeal form to activate if arrested unfairly. The confrontation campaign did not start with a bang, but with a cold line on a computer screen. Logan sent the video to 3 major newspapers without explanation or evidence. Only one line: "The real story has never been told." He did not go public himself, but forced the media to dig for the rest. Meanwhile, Henry called to report that his email was being monitored. Logan immediately reset the system, installed anti-tracking layers in the original video, ensuring any tampering would trigger an alert. Mason helped him connect to the police department's internal server through an old open route. What they found chilled Logan's blood. Many body cam clips from the day David was shot had been edited or blurred, but in a separate encrypted partition they found the original uncut version. In it, Briggs clearly said before pulling the trigger, "There must be a reason," then shouted, "He's reaching for a gun." Although David made no suspicious moves, Logan archived the original clip, made multiple copies, and planned to release it at the right time. Before leaving the base, he sat in front of the camera, face icy, eyes no longer those of a civilian but of a soldier preparing for the final battle. His voice articulated each word clearly. "We have let silence become a crime, but this time, silence will no longer be an option." The video was set to release publicly after 72 hours. It was not a threat, but a message. If the truth was hidden again, he would be the one to make it roar from the ashes. A video recorded from the second-floor balcony by Henry quietly appeared on a small forum dedicated to police misconduct cases. Within a few short hours, the clip capturing the moment David Carter was shot while raising his hands spread at a terrifying speed. From Reddit, Twitter to TikTok and Facebook, snippets of the video accompanied by brief captions such as, "He raised his hands," "They shot without hesitation," and "McRob is no exception," appeared everywhere. The online community, always ready to react to incidents involving race and police violence, immediately erupted. The hashtag "Justice for David" exploded within the first hours, followed by numerous other tags like "Who is Logan Carter?", "McRab Cover-Up," and "Say His Name." Users not only shared the video but also created extensive content analyzing and explaining every action of the police in the footage. A TikTok post showing the moment Briggs shouted "hands on the gun" before firing attracted millions of views, with thousands of comments questioning why justify crime with such a blatant lie. Independent news outlets quickly joined the discussion, inviting experts to analyze expressions, tone of voice, and even describe the tactical movements of the officers to prove that David posed no threat. The movement gained further momentum when influential figures spoke out publicly. An artist who had once been detained by police for suspicious movement shared David's image with a call to action. "This death cannot pass like a headline in the news." An African-American veteran spoke on a popular podcast. "We fought for freedom abroad only to die because of our skin color on our own soil." Human rights lawyers and social justice organizations elevated the case to become the central topic of campaigns that week, calling it a new iceberg in the system of discrimination. In McRae, residents began setting up small altars at the site where David was shot, lighting candles and placing white flowers. They took photos and shared them online with the message, "We remember you, David." Many had never met Logan or David before, but were deeply moved by the stark brutality of the scene. Organizations like Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International issued statements demanding an independent investigation, citing clear evidence of unjustified police use of force. Other clips resurfaced showing Briggs's previously aggressive behavior during multiple prior checks, fueling greater outrage. The peak was a widely circulated photo on Twitter. Logan Carter, bloodied on the head, kneeling on the ground, holding his brother's lifeless body, eyes filled with pain and cold resolve. Though taken from afar, the image clearly showed blood droplets on the street and the long-suppressed helplessness. A major account captioned the photo, "This is not a movie, this is America." Those words rang out like an angry declaration, a wake-up call. The movement no longer revolved solely around David. It became a new symbol for all the names who had been shot, mentioned briefly, then forgotten. This time, social media would not allow it to happen again, and this time, there was a figure like Logan Carter at the storm's center. The aftershocks from videos, images, and posts shared on social media began to exert heavy pressure on the authorities. The official website of the McRae Police Department was overwhelmed repeatedly, thousands of emails flooding in each hour, along with countless comments demanding accountability for every involved officer. On ChangeEck, a federal investigation petition gathered over 500,000 signatures in just 2 days. Amid the peak of anger, the police chief was forced to hold an emergency press conference. Although trying to avoid mentioning Logan or David's names, he faced fierce media questioning and was compelled to declare cooperation with federal agencies for a comprehensive review. The situation grew more complex when a civil rights legal team filed a petition with the Department of Justice requesting an independent investigation. Within 48 hours, a DOJ representative confirmed receipt of the request and assigned special agents to monitor McRab's initial inquiry. The pressure spread widely, turning what seemed a local incident into a national issue. Mainstream media could no longer ignore it. After initially focusing on James George, major outlets such as CNN, NBC, and the New York Times published in-depth reports revealing Logan Carter's identity and exposing the police's opaque handling of the case. Independent journalists flocked to McRae, interviewing residents and gathering leaked internal documents. An investigative report revealed that the initial police report made no mention of James George, fueling public outrage. An anonymous administrative staff member shared the internal report with a human rights lawyer, paving the way for larger suspicions of interference and cover-up after the shooting. Meanwhile, some officers, fearing involvement in the investigation, sent anonymous messages to civil groups pleading for protection if they decided to testify. Simultaneously, Briggs and Reynolds received notices of unpaid suspension pending internal investigation. However, the online community was dissatisfied, releasing numerous posts demanding their permanent dismissal, with hashtags calling for criminal prosecution spreading strongly. Amid all this, Logan Carter hardly appeared in the media anymore. He made no public statements, posted nothing on social media, and did not reveal his whereabouts. Yet the image of the man quietly holding his brother's body, blood soaking his shirt, eyes staring into the distant void, continued to be shared with captions like, "The silent hero, the one who brought the truth back." Without saying a word, Logan became a symbol of endurance and determined resistance against injustice. The community no longer saw him as just a victim, but as the one shaking the system. A prominent Twitter account wrote, "We have seen too many tears. This time, the living have stood up." Those words were not just encouragement, but a sign of an undercurrent rising. The system that once hid everything in darkness now faced a light it could no longer control. Only one day after Logan made his appearance public, everything began to vanish, as if an invisible hand was erasing the truth. The YouTube channel of the independent TV station that had aired his words was shut down within hours, and videos were repeatedly reported for the cold reason of community guidelines violation. Original videos of the shooting incident gradually disappeared from major platforms. News homepages were altered, and links to the videos returned an empty message. Content no longer exists. In his small apartment, Henry panicked as he tried to reopen the video backups he had uploaded to 3 cloud platforms. All returned encoding errors. The files were disabled with no way to access them, even with backup accounts. A repeated notification appeared, data restricted by order of the National Digital Information Authority. Henry felt suffocated from within. The phone in his hand dropped to the floor, but he barely noticed. At the same time, Logan woke up in a daze as his phone rang non-stop. Multiple close sources reported a strange phenomenon. All addresses containing original footage of David's shooting were blurred or completely deleted from servers. An anonymous hacker, once supporting the black community, called to inform that the clip shot by Henry had been placed on the federal blacklist, with all access automatically denied. A media crisis erupted. The independent station's host was fired overnight, bank accounts frozen, and signs of surveillance appeared at their home. Anonymous calls threatened, "Know enough, better stop now." A climate of information terror cast a shadow over the entire city. An opposing media campaign began to emerge. New articles claimed Henry had been internally investigated for manipulating animal medical records, though no evidence was disclosed. Some news sites revealed details of David's private life, focusing on average grades and a few school punishments, as if to suggest he was not completely innocent. Comments dug deeply into the constructed image of David. The victim is partly to blame. Henry quietly closed all the windows in his house and isolated himself for 24 hours. He had once written a suicide note only to tear it up, tortured by the feeling that he had failed to protect what should have been protected. When receiving a notification from the server that all video backups were completely removed and irrecoverable, Henry silently wept. On the central street, Logan passed by a giant LED screen playing an edited video clip. In the footage, David was labeled as a suspect resisting orders, with the audio cleverly altered. Logan stopped, his eyes glued to the screen, dried blood still on his sleeve, his gaze turning cold as stone. He whispered to himself, "If the truth can be erased, then those who live must rewrite it with action." A wind blew down the empty street, not a natural wind, but the wind of things to come. At the McRabb Police Headquarters, a brief press conference was held early in the morning. No apology, no admission of responsibility, only a curt statement echoed in the meeting room. Officers Briggs and Reynolds have been temporarily reinstated due to insufficient evidence to conclude procedural violations. The words were cold and stiff, like a legal form copied from an old template. When the 2 officers emerged, cameras caught a fleeting smile on Briggs's face, showing no remorse but satisfaction instead. Reynolds stood beside him, nodding slightly when reporters asked if they felt wronged. The images evoked the feeling of a chess game just turned. Lona was the first to report the news to Logan. When she finished, he stood still, his hand clenched until it trembled. The computer screen on the desk was smashed with a single punch. Shards fell like the last fragments of faith being crushed. Logan did not scream or curse, but his eyes burned with a smoldering rage. That anger spread through the streets, where hundreds gathered before the police station, holding handwritten banners. "David is my son. Blood cannot be erased. Return justice." A mother stood before the public microphone, tears flowing as she said, "If justice does nothing for us, who will protect the next children?" Immediately after, a group supporting the police force appeared. They wore shirts printed with the American flag and held signs like "Support law enforcement" and "I believe in my police." Heated arguments quickly broke out between the two sides, with shouting, accusations, and even small scuffles forcing control forces to intervene. The once peaceful streets of McRae fell into chaos. Shops along the main street closed early, and owners hung temporarily closed signs, though it was not yet noon. Tensions spilled from social media into real life like an uncontrollable wave. Logan refused all interviews. He did not want to say anything more at this time. Instead, he secretly met a group of veterans who had served with him on the battlefield years ago. They did not need many questions, only nodding when Logan asked for help collecting all the lost data. Copies, untouched security cameras, and eyewitness accounts from bystanders on that day, all were carefully reviewed by Logan. He knew every second of the scene would be crucial, and what had been erased must be recovered at all costs. In the small kitchen, Lona leaned against the door, quietly watching the man before her, intensely checking a hard drive. She softly asked, "What do you plan to do when the entire system has erased the truth?" Logan looked up, his eyes unwavering. "Rebuild the system from the rotten foundation." That answer was not a promise, but a declaration. He no longer wanted to save a system that chose to profit from silence. He wanted to replace it. At the end of the day, in front of the police station, a boy quietly approached to place a pencil drawing. The portrait was of David, gentle-faced and smiling widely. At the bottom was a scribbled note. "He once protected me from bullies." Logan stood motionless, bent down to pick it up, folded it and tucked it into his breast pocket. Without a word, he turned and walked toward the setting sun. Darkness was on his shoulders, but in his heart, a plan for counterattack had begun to take shape. He saw a thought flash across his mind, a plan to make it to the setting sun. Darkness was on his shoulders, but in his heart, a plan for counterattack had begun to take shape, and this time, nothing would be erased again. The atmosphere inside the temporary McRae police headquarters was as heavy as a stone, not because of silence, but because of tension twisted by the farce of those confident in their power. Logan entered with a cold face, the old blood stain on his sleeve dried, but his eyes remained as deep as an abyss. He did not announce himself or wait to be invited. He quietly walked straight to the records area where Briggs and Reynolds were waiting. Briggs propped his elbow on the edge of the table, his other hand lightly smoothing the sleeve of his uniform as if preparing to receive a distinguished guest. He smirked with a mix of mockery and contempt. "We thought you were busy arranging graves," he said lightly, but with a sharpness like a hidden blade behind polite words. Reynolds stepped closer, pretending seriousness, his cloudy eyes scanning Logan like a cheap item. "Want to review how David resisted? We lost the video, but if you want, I can reenact every frame." He raised his hand, mimicking a yank, then chuckled mockingly. Briggs added smoothly, with practiced sarcasm, "A Delta Force commander failing to protect a kid carrying a loaf of bread. Truly a military legend." Laughter erupted from a corner of the room, from some young officers who had never understood war but knew all too well how to humiliate. Logan stood still like a statue. He looked directly into the eyes of each person, from Briggs to Reynolds, and then the young cop laughing loudly behind them. No reply came, only eyes, deep, still, and silent. A silence that instantly changed the atmosphere. Reynolds hesitated, hand on hip, scratching his neck lightly. Briggs licked his lips, trying to maintain a mocking demeanor, but his shoulders stiffened. "This is our turf, you'd better remember that." Another voice rose, mixing with the clack of boots on concrete. A cop under 30 with a haughty gaze spoke as if representing the whole system. Logan still did not react. He turned and walked slowly out of the room, without looking back, but just as the door nearly closed, he paused briefly, tilted his head, and uttered a cold phrase like a breath from the deep forest. The price of complacency usually comes when you least expect it. The words dropped like a heavy lead block, hitting the tiled floor and leaving a long echo in a room once thought to be the powerful stage of the powerful. Briggs fell silent, teeth clenched. Reynolds swallowed dryly, his mind repeating the name Logan Carter like an unwanted curse. No one laughed anymore. Each suddenly realized the show they thought they controlled had touched something outside the script. The protection system in McRae extended beyond a few individuals in the police department. It was a meticulously constructed network interwoven among government agencies, the city council, the district attorney's office, and influential local media figures. Every person in that machine held a link. Their silence was paid for with rapid promotions, administrative support payments, or absolute protection when violations occurred. What Logan faced was no longer a mistaken police shooting, but a system skilled at legitimizing all wrongdoing. Shortly after Logan left the police station, a secret meeting was held in an internal office. Within hours, all footage from public cameras around the incident area was ordered to be withdrawn for system synchronization. All images that could prove Logan and David were targeted vanished. An internal report was rewritten, concluding that David had threatened law enforcement, and Logan failed to cooperate during duty. Briggs and Reynolds, though previously named in the preliminary investigation, were unexpectedly reinstated after only 36 hours. The reason given was lack of evidence confirming wrongdoing. Everything was legitimized by the signature of a person in the Administrative Oversight Agency, someone Logan had heard of during an anti-corruption campaign 3 years earlier, but was forced out for exceeding authority. The cross-investigation system was exploited to the fullest. Independent supervisory units were operated by people who had worked with or had personal ties to those involved. Instead of seeking truth, they became a tight wall protecting a rotten machine. Logan began recognizing old faces in the files, including an official he had exposed in the Molly campaign, now appointed to coordinate the McGrath investigation. Outside, those intending to speak out were also suppressed. Henry was summoned to the station, but just as he was about to present video evidence, an investigator spoke first. The footage lacks legal authentication and cannot be used as evidence. He was sent home with a reminder not to distribute unverified materials to avoid violating public information laws. Some residents who live-streamed the incident were visited by police for equipment permit checks. A young man who spoke to the press was notified the next day that his driver's license was suspended due to unfinished traffic penalty procedures. These moves were quiet, but enough to make the crowd hesitate. Amid all this siege, Logan sat before the strategy board at home. On the large wall were countless documents, photos, and arrows connecting like a spider web. A photo of David was placed at the center, below which was handwritten, "To break them, you must create something stronger than fear." Logan's eyes no longer reflected anger, but the calculation of a soldier accustomed to organized enemies. This time, the battlefield was not desert or jungle, but the very land once called home. Lona's apartment was at the end of the third-floor corridor, behind an old chestnut-colored wooden door. Inside, the air was strangely still, as if time had slowed down to allow someone a deep breath. Lona stood silently for a few seconds before knocking, his arms still dusted with road grime and his heartbeat tightening from the memories. When the door opened slightly, the scent of jasmine tea wafted out, and a soft yellow light fell upon the face of the woman he once believed to be the only safe thing in this chaotic world. Lona said nothing upon seeing him, nor did she ask any questions. She simply leaned gently to let him pass and walked slowly toward the familiar sofa. The small apartment was sparsely furnished, everything neat and full of warmth. On the shelves were a few old psychology books, several green plants stretching toward the open window. She lived alone, but Logan had never felt this place lacked life. There was something in the way Lona cared for her space that made him want to stay, even though he had never stayed anywhere. Lona used to be a psychological therapist for veterans and trauma victims. She carried a gentle demeanor, long curly hair falling lightly over her shoulders, eyes calm as if she had looked straight into the most shattered souls, yet retained their warmth intact. Lona met her at a workshop dedicated to frontline service members. He was invited to share about combat coordination, but what he remembered was her eyes watching him from the back row, not curious, not pitying, but deep enough to touch the part he always kept secret. At first, it was just brief exchanges, a few polite words after meetings and formal emails. But these small conversations paved the way for longer, quieter talks. With Lona, Logan did not have to play the strong man. He could speak about the cold nights on the Syrian border, about brothers who had fallen in silence, about nightmares waking him in the night with hands clenched as if holding a grenade pin. She listened without interruption or pressure. Her questions were calm, just enough to make him reflect, never to wound. Then there were days when he came only to sit quietly, saying nothing, and Lona said nothing either, only the sound of boiling water in the kettle and the afternoon light filtering through dusty glass. Logan once saved her during a rare moment when both entered a dangerous zone. A former patient came to the apartment, disturbed, threatening, hands trembling, clutching a small knife. Logan did not hit or shout, he just stepped between them and looked straight into that person's eyes. His eyes then were cold enough to make the other drop the weapon, steady enough for Lona to understand this was not his first encounter with the line between life and death. Since then, their relationship defied labels. Neither lovers nor soulmates, but two people who knew each other's wounds and did not run away. Logan never made promises. Lona never demanded. She understood he did not belong to candlelit dinners or wine, yet she invited him whenever possible, because she knew he would come if he was still breathing. After David's death, Lona was the only place Logan came to when the city became too suffocating. She did not ask what he was thinking or force him to recount what happened. She gently touched his hand, sat beside him, and simply said, "I know now is not the time for you to tell, but when you want to, I will be here." Logan neither answered nor nodded, but that night, he stayed over, and for the first time in many long nights he slept deeply. In a world where villains are shielded by badges and laws, Lona was proof of another kind of strength, that kindness, when steadfast and timely, can save a person from their own darkness. Logan returned when the streetlights were on. The corridor wind whispered through the door gap, bringing cold air and the burnt scent of rain somewhere on the tin roof. He stood in front of Lona's apartment for a few more seconds, breathing heavily, arms still bruised from the long session with his lawyer, a discussion full of dense documents, grim legal possibilities, and the system's shake of the head that never intended to protect people like him. When the door opened, Lona asked nothing. She draped a towel, still fragrant with fabric softener, over his shoulders, then led him inside, silently, as if all storms had to pause at this warm boundary. They sat by the window, hot tea in hand, and outside the streetlights flickered irregularly. Every time a patrol car passed, the white light swept across the walls like a hidden sting, but Logan did not blink. He stared into the distance, silent, while Lona leaned gently on his shoulder, listening with deep attention. Both were tired, but it was this tiredness that made the other's presence sacred. When the tea was poured for the second time, Lona spoke. Her simple question struck like a knock on Logan's closed mind. "Are you afraid you won't beat this system?" Logan smirked. Not a laugh nor a sarcasm, but the reflex of someone who had seen too many failures glossed with words. "I'm not afraid of failing. I'm afraid of forgetting why I started." She nodded briefly. "Then I will remind you whenever you forget." Logan glanced at her, his gaze softening, the defensive layer gone from his eyes. They spoke of David as the tea cooled. Logan said David forced him to learn dancing even though he hated crowds, loud music, and losing control of the space around him. but David wouldn't give up, saying, "If we dance badly, the women in this whole neighborhood will be disappointed." Lona laughed, her hand on his chest where the heart still throbbed heavily from grief not yet eased. "Though David is gone, you still carry a part of him inside you, and I see that every day." Logan said nothing, squeezing her hand, his rough palm meeting a small, soft one, emotions rising like a slow tide. They leaned on each other without reason. No declarations, no promises for tomorrow, no gestures learned from movies, just two people who had lived through loss, understood exhaustion, clinging to a moment not to collapse. Their embrace carried no desire but survival. Logan wondered how many times he had survived because of this feeling, one he never allowed himself to touch while in uniform. Lona did not try to soothe him, she just let him lean in without falling. The night passed in silence. Rays from outside lights tracing gentle streaks on the ceiling like a peaceful lullaby. They lay close without exchanging a single word, breathing evenly, the space complete, as if the world outside had never existed. Logan looked up at the ceiling, eyes open but mind no longer running. In that brief moment, he was neither a commander, a witness, nor a target being hunted. He was a man who had lost his brother, survived the line between life and death, and was resting. That gave him an added strength beyond training or tactics. It came from someone who looked at him without asking how many enemies he had killed, only asking, "Can you still live as a human being?" And the answer, though unspoken, formed with each deep breath held in that embrace. The heat from David's case had not yet cooled down when public opinion began to shift sharply. The videos provided by Henry, combined with testimony from a former Delta Force operative, sent shockwaves through the media. Social networks flooded with banners supporting Logan, calling for a thorough investigation into the local police system. The pressure forced officers previously named by Logan to temporarily step down from duty. Yet this silence became a cover for a more covert reaction. A gang that had appeared in internal investigation records, those with indirect financial ties to some uniformed individuals, suddenly re-emerged with a new mission: to make Logan understand that his fight was not just about logic and evidence. Lona finished her last therapy session of the day as the city lights came on. She declined Logan's offer to assign a guard, reasoning it was to maintain patient safety and avoid becoming a source of anxiety herself. The phone Logan had given her the day before was not with her. She drove down to the parking basement of the building where the therapy office was located, her mind still lingering on the tired look in Logan's eyes when he left that morning. Her footsteps were unhurried, her thoughts organizing professional notes in her head. A white van parked a few meters away, silent as part of the wall. Later, security footage would show it had followed her for 2 hours, shifting positions each time she stopped. Lona could not know this. When she touched the door handle of her car, a faint noise ahead caught her attention. A man lay twisted between parked cars, clutching his stomach, groaning in pain. Lona moved instinctively as a professional, bending to check his breath. That was the last moment before another shadow appeared behind her, covering her face with a drugged cloth and pressing hard. Lona struggled weakly for a few seconds before being lifted and shoved into the back seat of the van. The door slammed shut, the engine hummed softly, and then everything vanished into the night, as fast as a breeze sweeping through an empty street. Logan sat in his office, the screen before him still displaying a heat map from data tracking he had just received from his team. His first call to Lona went unanswered. He assumed she was busy. The second and third calls only met voicemail. He began to sense something was wrong. When he called her therapy office and the hospital she frequented after work, all replied that she had left. Logan needed no other sign. He dashed out, driving nearly recklessly through familiar streets. Lona's apartment door was closed, and the lock showed no sign of tampering, but to Logan those details were irrelevant. He pressed his hand against the door, took a deep breath, stepped back, then kicked sharply at the middle latch. The door burst open to utter silence. Everything was neat, no disturbance, yet too clean for normal. He quickly scanned the room and stepped straight to the kitchen. Near the trash bin was a crumpled piece of paper with blurred blue ink. You should know when to stop before you lose everything. Logan held the paper between two fingers, looked up at the ceiling as the light cast shadows on his face, slowly transforming. No anger, no shouting. His eyes lowered, deep and cold as water before a storm. He spoke softly, as if whispering to himself, "They want to play to the end." From that moment, the battle was no longer just between him and the system. It had entered a phase where anyone who touched those he loved would pay a price in the language he knew best. The phone rang in the quiet night. Logan had just washed his face, water dripping on his collar, when the screen showed a hidden number. He answered without hesitation, lips pressed tight, eyes staring into the dark room. A male voice, altered by distortion, spoke sharply, each word cutting into his brain like a knife. "If you continue, that woman will be the first corpse, understand?" Logan did not reply, his gaze fixed as if locking an invisible image, breathing steadily, unwavering. "What do you want?" he asked, voice low and hoarse. The voice on the other end replied briefly, "Evidence. All of it, within 12 hours, then hung up. Logan sat up straight, hands placed firmly on his thighs as if steadying himself. The room grew so silent that the fluorescent light's hum became a heavy background beat. He closed his eyes for 3 seconds, then opened them and dialed a single contact saved as cipher. The line was answered as Logan issued his order. "Trace the signal of Lona's wrist device, the backup GPS tracker, and the vehicle's travel history today. Limit within a 30-mile radius. Focus on the west basement parking." The reply was a single word, "Understood." Lona once said softly like a morning breeze, "If you have to choose between me and justice, choose what allows you to live with yourself." Now, those words returned, piercing Logan's mind like a challenge. Delivering the evidence meant letting the culprit go free, the truth forever hidden, and David's death erased from history. But keeping the evidence meant risking the life of the only person who could still make him feel he had not completely turned into a machine. A notification buzzed. A message with a short video arrived from the recent caller. Logan opened it silently. The screen showed a small room, yellow light, dim and blurry. Lona was tied with her hands behind her back, sitting against a concrete wall, hair disheveled, a swollen bruise on her left cheek. Though her mouth was taped, her eyes stared straight into the camera. No panic, no pleading, only a steady, unyielding presence that stirred sorrow in the viewer. Logan stared long, brows furrowed lightly, as if carving that face into memory stroke by stroke. He stood, walked to his desk, and opened a safe. Inside were 2 hard drives, an original and a copy. His hand rested on both, fingers trembling slightly before stilling. He closed the safe. His eyes showed no hesitation. Lona was his support, but David was his blood. Justice could not be bargained like merchandise. So, if they wanted to gamble, he would play. But on his own terms, Logan sent a signal to Cypher, "Prepare a fake data file. Attach a tracker to the handover device. I will deliver." The response came as an encrypted code, confirming the order. Logan holstered his gun, fastened his jacket zipper. His eyes were no longer red with anger but sharp with deadly focus. No prayer crossed his mind, only plans, shooting angles, travel times, distraction points, and approaches to the target. She was still alive, and as long as that breath existed, he would go to the end at any cost. Because some people could not be lost again. Because if he lost Lona, he would lose the last piece of humanity left in himself. And then the whole system would no longer face a soldier, but a nightmare that could think. 2 hard drives lay on the cold steel table before Logan, stark like 2 stones resting on his chest. One contained all the original data on abuse of power, deleted internal camera footage, and a copy documenting the chain of crimes committed by a group of police officers under the guise of justice. The other was encrypted data, preserving only the surface, just enough to deceive those controlling Lona's fate. Logan stared at the devices, inhaling deeply, as if to gather enough breath for an irreversible decision. Mona's image in the video replayed slowly in his mind. The bruise on her cheek, eyes unyielding, her posture leaning toward the light as if trying to hold on to something not to be taken away. She did not need rescue. She needed him to stay clear-headed. Her words echoed silently in his head like a reminder. Do the right thing, your way. Waves of emotion surged in his chest, but he forced his breathing steady again. The fear of losing Lona was real, but if he sacrificed justice for David, all they had endured together would be meaningless. He took the encrypted drive, wrapped in a simple leather pouch. Cypher had pre-installed a fake GPS tracker inside, designed to fool the routing systems the kidnappers might access. Logan planned a two-layer strategy, the first layer to deliver a decoy, the second to attach a tracking signal so Cypher could trace the device's location when they examined the hard drive. He did not contact the police or seek help, only sending a silent message to Cypher: non-violent action, monitor, and be ready to respond on command. Dusk fell as he entered the old industrial area to the west. The warehouse stood silent like a dense black block amid dry trees. Logan entered alone, footsteps slow, eyes scanning, ears stretched to catch every sound, but carrying no weapon. A figure appeared from behind an old forklift, face covered, voice low. "Put the bag down." Logan complied without a word. The man bent down, unzipped the pouch, glanced at the hard drives, then nodded slightly. He walked straight to a truck parked outside, started the engine, turned, and left the warehouse, tires stirring a glossy layer of dust. Logan's phone buzzed as he stepped away from the warehouse. A short message appeared. "Good, you've still got some brain." He read the words 3 times, then deleted them as if they had never existed. Rain began to fall in scattered drops, the first chilling and sharp on his shoulder like the silence tightening in his mind. He looked up, eyes unblinking, letting rain mix with sweat tracing down his temples. There was no news of Lona, no proof she was alive or punished right after the hard drives fell into their hands. Logan's mind felt like a blank wall carved deeper by shapeless anxiety, but he refused to panic. The battle had entered a new phase. There, no social media judged, no reporters uncovered the truth. Only he and the darkness remained, and he understood that in the dark, the one who holds on to willpower the longest is the one who survives. This was not a kneeling surrender, but a strategic retreat. He had chosen to keep the original copy, preserving the chance to strike back. But this choice also meant accepting a torn part of his reason while the only woman he loved lay somewhere in the enemy's hands. Step by step, he returned to the car. Raindrops hitting the windshield, everything outside blurred like the edges of a nightmare, refusing to dissipate. Yet Logan no longer allowed himself to dream. He had given up a part to save the rest. From this moment on, the game had no rules, only an ending. The phone rang as Logan sat in the car, unconsciously staring at the empty space beyond the bus stop. A row of streetlights cast light on the mottled pavement, and a few cars passed quietly, leaving no trace but the steady roll of wheels. A young female voice sounded cold and clear. "Your person will be released near the West bus station. Eyes closed, mouth sealed. If she still wants to live." The call ended before he could utter a word. Logan put away the phone, hand resting lightly on the steering wheel, eyes lowered to the left where a gray truck was slowly passing by. The rear door opened before the vehicle fully stopped. A small body was pushed out like worthless cargo. Lona rolled onto the roadside, hair tangled, clothes dirty but still breathing. Logan rushed forward, catching her as her head tilted, breathing hard as if her entire chest had just surfaced from underwater. Her hands were still loosely bound with fabric strips, wrists swollen red. Her body was much lighter, but her gaze weighed like thousands of unspoken questions. Logan untied the ropes without a word or question. He held her close, palms pressed to the back of her head, sliding down her back as if checking every intact bone. Lona's apartment was shrouded in darkness. Faint light from the kitchen spilling out just enough to see the face opposite without hiding anything. They said nothing for the first hour. Logan made tea, placed the cup before her, then sat opposite, his eyes hollowed by exhaustion, by what had been sacrificed, and by uncertainty if what was lost could be regained. Lona placed her hand on his. pressing close as if to hold on to the last warmth from someone who had crossed the boundary between sacrifice and despair. She looked at him, silently asking, "How much have you sacrificed?" Lona met her gaze without avoidance. He briefly recounted, each breath, each choice, that it was not the original copy, that he knew they might detect it but just needed more time. She nodded, eyes lowered, then whispered, "I don't blame you. I just worry, next time, if I'm the one lost, will you still have a reason to fight?" The question hung in the air. Logan did not answer immediately, but in his gaze, something both broke and was reborn. He no longer wore the cold facade or the careless attitude of the early days. He was gradually learning to share, with fragments of emotions he had always pushed aside before. Lona was the final edge between his fighting instinct and his remaining humanity, that fragile line that saved him from becoming a living weapon. Their closeness no longer belonged to romantic love. It was the bond of two survivors, holding each other out of fear of falling if they let go. Lona sat beside him, head lightly resting on his shoulder. Logan, unmoving, as if every breath he could give had to be kept for this moment. He looked out the window, beyond the glass, a darkness thick as syrup. He knew the system thought he had weakened, had stepped back, but they were wrong. Logan had never been weak. He only paused to keep the most important part before counterattacking, and next time, there would be no negotiation, no bargaining, only the end. An end he was ready to write with his own hand. After Lona was released, Logan sat silently for hours in his office, the screen's light blurring across his face, marked deeply by fatigue. The fake data had been sent out, but what they could do next required more than luck. Logan knew that to reach the very end, he had to activate the final counterattack line, where he had buried all the real evidence, true faith and memories only the battlefield had ever known. He opened a secure communication channel to the only person he had ever called the last wall, Malik Quinn. Malik lived in a wooden house, isolated in the forests of North Carolina. When Logan stepped out of the car, he saw Malik cleaning his gun on the porch, his dark eyes staring straight at him as if waiting for hours. Tall, shaved head, body carved from stone, Malik was the type of man who spoke little, but every look seemed to strip away the outer skin of anyone daring to stare too long. His voice was deep and even. When he spoke first, there was no emotion. "You need what's buried deep, right?" In the war, Malik was the man Logan always placed behind him when he had to lead the way, entrusted with protecting the formation when everything fell apart. As a technical and code-taking specialist in the Black Echo team, Malik once infiltrated national systems within 6 minutes, while all other networks were cut off. After Logan left the battlefield, Malik was the one who kept the original data obtained from the hacked internal server, the chain of evidence involving abuses of power, body cam deletion, and collusion inside the police system Logan was confronting, buffeting each day, stripped of data, to bring. That data was never sent through any digital transmission. Malik stored it in a layered offline system using military-grade encryption that even Logan did not know the exact location of. He understood that keeping the original copy was important, but even more crucial was to make sure no one, including himself, knew where it existed to prevent exploitation in the worst scenarios. Now, Logan no longer had to guess. He had returned not to seek salvation, but to end it. The leak led him inside through a steel door locked behind a bookshelf. In the small basement filled with old equipment, dim light illuminated their suntanned faces, evoking the past. On the table lay 2 military backpacks, one worn with faded straps. Malik tossed Logan a hard drive. "No one's touched this for 2 years. I didn't even dare to open it." Logan caught it, his palm tightening. Memories flashed like bullets. The battle in Firestorm Valley, where they were surrounded for 3 days, under fire from all 4 directions. Logan was hit by shrapnel in the leg, blood soaking his pants, but Malik carried him across a minefield to the evacuation point. No thanks, no promises, only trust. The bond that tied them since then. When Logan revealed the real reason for his return, Malik asked no questions and showed no surprise. "My brother was arrested last year on fabricated testimony. My mother died 3 weeks later from shock. I left the army. but I still owe my family a response, and you, Logan, are the only chance. That statement held no hatred, only a harsh truth, like a bullet chambered and waiting to be fired. Logan nodded. Their eyes met one last time before the data was loaded into the decryptor. The battle ahead was no longer one man's. It was the shared response of two who knew well what blood, soil, and betrayal in the shadows meant, and this time they would not retreat. Under the cold white light of the basement office, two men who had survived the war zone now faced a different fight, where bullets did not fly, but consequences could destroy a lifetime. Malik sat before 3 screens, lines of code scrolling vertically, the hard drive spinning with a background sound like a tense heartbeat. Logan stood beside him, arms crossed, eyes tracking every file decrypted and categorized. Malik proposed a 3-step plan with no room for error. First, fully decrypt the original data, classify the evidence into groups of violations, deleted cams, abuse of power, forged documents, witness intimidation. Second, create a legally admissible extract to be forwarded to the federal human rights lawyer Lona had connected with. The final step was preparing personal testimonies and confirming the data's originality while registering as expert witnesses in the upcoming special hearing. Malik's status as a former Delta Force member was not merely symbolic. In the court system, especially for cases involving public agency conduct, testimony from an ex-military officer with a clean record and advanced technical expertise carried special weight. He was not simply a data provider, but a living witness who could prove the data chain remained unaltered from collection to security. Together with the federal lawyer introduced by Lona, Malik cross-hackered every video clip and data log to ensure the timeline perfectly matched actual events. He even contacted a former NSA encryption engineer to testify, if needed, to confirm technological reliability. Logan stayed by throughout the process but did not intervene, allowing Malik to lead the technical phase as the old teammate turned guide. One late night, as Logan sat motionless before the screen, eyes darkened from sleepless nights, Malik pulled him outside to a vacant lot behind the house. In hand were 2 guns, ear protectors, and a target set. "Come here, keep your nerves steady." They stood in silence, taking turns firing. The gunshots echoed like a heartbeat reawakened after long strain. Malik spoke without looking back. "I carried you when you wanted to die. Now, you carry the names of David and Lona, but I'm here, and this time, I won't let you fall." The final scene of that night took place in the data verification room. Logan sat on one side, hands braced on the table, Malik opposite him. The weak yellow light cast long shadows of them both. The hard drive had just finished extracting the final copy, its green light glowing like a signal to act. Malik removed his headphones, leaned back. He looked at Logan, voice even and low. "It's time. I'm not doing this for justice. I'm doing it for you. But if you still believe in what they call justice, this time, you have to go all the way." That very night, they contacted the federal lawyer's office. Malik sent a valid copy of all evidence through a special secure channel. The lawyer replied within an hour. Received, preparing emergency filings for the hearing. Malik and Logan exchanged a final glance before shutting down the screen. The first strike had been launched, and this time it would pierce the deepest layer of the system they were determined to expose. The atmosphere outside the courthouse was packed with people. They crowded both sides of the old stone steps, holding high handmade banners and striking black and white signs reading, "Justice for David, Protect Black Lives," and "We saw what they erased." Local and national media set up tripods, camera lights flashing continuously, with the sound of shutter clicks bursting like rapid fire. Local security forces cooperated with state police to set up barricades, cordoning off filming areas and protecting the main entrance for trial participants. Though the sky was clear, every gaze was heavy. No one smiled. Logan Carter appeared at the center of the steps, tall and purposeful, carrying a thin file tied with a simple string. He wore a black suit and white shirt without a tie. His eyes were cold and silent, but full of gravity. Logan avoided the camera lenses and did not respond to the crowd calling his name. Beside him stood the lead plaintiff's lawyer, and behind them was Lona, a young woman with deep, steadfast eyes and hands resting on her knees as if clinging to her last calm. Briggs and Reynolds entered from a side door, dressed in plain clothes but exuding overconfidence. Their lawyer was a well-known figure who had successfully defended more than 10 cases involving unlawful police shootings. Briggs smiled lightly as he passed the crowd holding signs, while Reynolds deliberately rolled up his sleeve to reveal a tattoo of the national flag. They sat in the defense area, calm as if attending an administrative meeting. On the high bench, the presiding judge, a middle-aged white woman, tapped her gavel gently and called for order. This trial is not only of legal significance but also a symbol of responsibility and truth, she said. To her left, the jury of 9 people of various races nodded silently. The eyes from the gallery studied them, as if scrutinizing every expression and subtle movement. The prosecutor stepped forward and slowly read through the entire case record. His voice rang clear, emphasizing details. The victim was an unarmed citizen, pursued with prejudiced words, shot in the chest while raising his hands in surrender. The recording camera was tampered with immediately after the incident, and footage vanished simultaneously from the system. The defense lawyer showed no reaction beyond a familiar sneer. As to Morris, when asked for opening remarks, he spoke firmly. My client acted under emergency circumstances based on a report of an armed crime call. They had the right to protect themselves and the community. A few behind him sighed. Logan sat upright, expression unchanged. The prosecutor did not argue immediately. He continued with a direct question. If that action was legitimate self-defense, then why was the camera footage deleted, access records falsified, and all case information erased from the internal system in less than 2 hours after the incident? The courtroom fell silent. The judge made notes, then turned to the clerk to confirm information about the partial recovery possibility of reset data. The tension peaked when the clerk announced that a special witness would appear today at the plaintiff's request, a U.S. military officer who had participated in numerous covert operations and held a role closely related to both the victim and the accused. Whispers instantly spread throughout the room. Briggs clenched his jaw. Reynolds turned to his lawyer, his face visibly pale. Logan looked up at the witness stand, hand lightly resting on the table, eyes unblinking. Amid hundreds of confused gazes, there was one man who already knew the truth about to unfold, and he had waited too long for this moment. The courthouse side door opened amid the audience's restrained curiosity. A tall man entered, wearing a gray shirt and simple trousers, walking upright as if he had never bowed to anyone. His cold, bright eyes silently scanned the faces watching intently. When he stepped to the witness stand, the murmurs ceased. The man introduced himself as Nathan Cole, a Special Forces officer and former mid-level commander of Delta Force operations. He faced the jury, took the oath with a steady and strong voice, each word pronounced firmly like a cocking gun. With a calm demeanor, Nathan began recounting. Logan Carter was the person he trusted most on the battlefield, not because of rank or achievements, but for his ability to make decisions under life or death pressure. He emphasized that Logan had led dozens of strategic missions abroad, where one wrong choice meant the whole team's destruction. Despite facing real bullets, Logan was always the last to fire and the first to shield his comrade. If Logan did not resist those officers that day, it was not because he was weak, Nathan said, eyes fixed on Briggs and Reynolds. It was a soldier's instinct, forged by life itself, to prevent unnecessary bloodshed. The jury took continuous notes, and some in the audience leaned forward as if afraid to miss any detail. When Briggs's lawyer stood to rebut, mocking the difference between the battlefield and the street, Nathan responded without blinking. To them, guns are symbols of intimidation. To us, calmness is a skill learned through blood and loss. Logan understands that better than anyone. The courtroom quieted as Nathan told of an old letter David once wrote to Logan after a humanitarian mission where Logan risked bringing supplies into a shelling zone to protect volunteer engineers, including David. The letter read, "I am proud to have a brother like you. Because of you, I understand strength is not in the sound of guns, but in the trust others place in you without doubt." That statement made a woman sitting behind burst into tears, tears falling on her unfinished notes. A solemn atmosphere enveloped the room, needing no emphasis to make everyone clearly feel how fragile the boundary between life and death had been. Nathan pulled a carefully sealed document from his briefcase. The prosecutor took it and asked permission from the court to disclose it. It was an authenticated email from the military commander-in-chief, stating that Logan had personally received a letter of appreciation from the president for strategic achievements in a top-secret Middle East operation. The letter was publicly displayed on a large screen. The respectful words appeared like a sharp blade cutting through all doubt. "Lieutenant Colonel Logan Carter is not just a warrior, he is a symbol of control, discipline, and honor." The prosecutor was not finished. He turned to Nathan and nodded. Nathan pressed a button on an encrypted device. A video played, a backup extracted from a tactical system Nathan had activated to protect Logan. From a low and distant angle, it clearly showed David raising his hands, voice trembling, "I have nothing in my hands." The next moment, Briggs's shout rang out like an execution order, "Shoot him!" Then a gunshot. The room fell silent. Briggs lowered his head. Reynolds glanced at his partner, eyes dull. The defense attorney requested a recess to recess the legal strategy. The judge nodded without further comment. Logan remained seated, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the front left row where David's empty chair from their technical graduation ceremony now sat cold and silent. As the courtroom fell silent under the weight of the heavy testimonies from previous sessions, the side door of the courthouse suddenly swung open. A middle-aged man wearing a pale gray shirt buttoned to the collar entered with an unusually calm gait, clutching a thick folder of documents. He said nothing, merely nodded to the court staff and walked straight toward the prosecutor. A few murmurs broke out in the gallery as the public recognized the local veterinarian. "It's him, the doctor who recorded that day. It's Henry." The prosecutor hesitated slightly upon seeing Henry. They exchanged quiet words in a corner before the lawyer led him to the evidence table. Henry withdrew a carefully sealed electronic storage device from the folder and presented it, along with a sworn statement verifying its origin. The documents clearly stated the time, how he obtained the data, and why he only now disclosed it. Henry spoke with unwavering eyes. "I waited until the moment when the truth could be heard, not buried under power and protection. I believe that moment is today." The prosecutor addressed the presiding judge, requesting permission to play the video verified by the original body cam footage. After a brief verification with the court's security technician, the judge agreed. The large screen lit up, static crackled over the speakers, and the courtroom held its breath. The opening footage was from the camera mounted on Briggs's shirt. Though not perfectly clear, it was sharp enough to show each step and every face. Logan and David walked on the sidewalk, David's voice softly asking his brother about movies. Immediately after, Briggs and Reynolds appeared from the patrol car. Briggs approached with a low voice full of contempt. "Why are two black men walking like that in this area? What's under your shirts?" The courtroom fell silent as David reacted with confusion, explaining they had just bought groceries. Briggs stepped closer, pulling David's shirt out of his pants, causing the groceries to fall. David raised his hands and repeated, "I have nothing, you can check." Suddenly, a shout rang out and the camera shook violently. Briggs's harsh voice spat each word. "You think raising your hands means I'll let you go?" Then a gunshot echoed and the camera trembled again. The image tilted toward the ground, blood spreading near David's feet, and screams erupted from the nearby crowd. The footage continued as Reynolds rushed in, kicking Logan down, who had not touched anyone. Logan was pinned to the sidewalk, his head hitting the concrete curb. Reynolds looked around and spotted a woman filming with her phone, shouting immediately, "Don't film this, nobody's allowed to post it." Sobs echoed through the courtroom. An elderly woman covered her mouth as tears streamed down her face. The jury bowed their heads. A middle-aged man removed his glasses and wiped his eyes with his sleeve. The presiding judge signaled to stop the playback and requested the clerk to verify the legal status of the clip. The atmosphere thickened, dense like an odorless smoke. Riggs' lawyer stood, voice slightly flustered, requesting to cross-examine the new witness. Henry stepped into the center, calmer than ever. "Why are you presenting this tape only now? the lawyer asked. Henry looked at him for a moment and replied firmly, "Because I once thought justice would run itself. I was wrong. Justice needs a push from those who dare to stand up." When the lawyer tried to cast doubt on Henry's motives, he smiled faintly and said, "I once healed Briggs's dog, a pit bull with a burnt paw. It was in pain but never attacked anyone, and I have never seen an animal react as cruelly as Briggs did that day. That was not a professional reflex, it was a deliberate choice." His final words cut the courtroom's air like a knife. No one challenged him. Nothing remained to defend. Only the undeniable truth stood there, revealed in every clear image. The courtroom's lunch break was no longer the calm pause it had been on previous days. In the jury room, murmurs stretched endlessly. An elderly man rapidly flipped through notes, repeatedly underlining timestamps, his eyes lingering on the phrase, "deliberate camera deletion." A stern-looking white woman turned to her colleague, speaking softly but decisively. No more doubt. The presiding judge remained seated at the bench despite the recess, scribbling notes more densely than usual. Calling the court clerk close, she requested a thorough review of the McGrath Police Department's internal records, especially system access logs within the 36 hours following the shooting. Outside the courthouse, public reaction flared like fire spreading through dry wind. The video provided by Dr. Henry was quickly verified and broadcast by news agencies shortly after its courtroom release. On social media, numerous new hashtags emerged, climbing to the top of national trends. "We saw it too," "Body Cam Justice," "Logan," and "David." Local television aired live footage from the courthouse grounds, where crowds tripled the usual number. People pitched tents, brought folding chairs, water, and banners. Some hung white banners stating, "One life cannot be erased with a camera." A photo of David was printed in a wooden frame, placed between two white flower bouquets and a faded mechanic's cap. An atmosphere of silent fury enveloped the area. Inside, Briggs and Reynolds' lawyer showed signs of faltering. Previously, he frequently interrupted the prosecutor, redirecting questions toward Logan's personal life. Now, he repeatedly requested more time to cross-check files and asked to postpone questioning the next witness. Briggs remained silent through the break, gripping his knees tightly, sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning set low. Reynolds did not look up, eyes fixed downward, buried beneath the gray ash of the wood-paneled wall opposite Logan. On the plaintiff's side, Logan sat upright, hands clasped before him. His gaze no longer held the anger of earlier days, but was cold and steady, like a stone amid the current. It was the look of a man who had survived war, seen the razor-thin line between death and truth illuminated in the flash of a gun barrel. Amid media chaos and public pressure, a McGrath Police Department administrative officer unexpectedly contacted the prosecutor. She testified that she had been ordered by superiors to delete the system access log data the night after the incident. Attached were screenshots she saved internally as a precaution. This revelation shocked the entire legal team. The risk of reopening numerous old cases involving officers present during David's shooting became clear. The prosecutor's office urgently summoned the State Internal Affairs Division to coordinate an investigation of the related misconduct. At the end of the hearing, the prosecutor stood and requested the suspension of all officers directly involved during the investigation period, including McGrath Police Department leadership. The presiding judge did not hesitate. She adjourned the session until the next day to review testimonies and additional evidence, but added a statement that silenced the courtroom. Justice may be slow, but it is advancing, and its path will no longer be obstructed by anyone. Logan left the courthouse with Lona amid thunderous applause. They neither waved, nor spoke, nor showed triumph. But Logan's steps were firm, like someone who had just laid the first stone in rebuilding the foundation of justice through all the blood, tears, and honor of the fallen. Within the sealed courtroom, every breath seemed held as the video from Dr. Henry began to play on the large screen. Familiar sounds echoed, screams, gunshots, David collapsing onto the cold, hard pavement, and Logan's eyes blazing with suppressed horror. The entire audience fell silent, all eyes fixed on the unmistakable footage that could not be denied. When the clip ended, a heavy silence filled the room. The presiding judge ordered a pause. requesting the technical investigation team to verify the video's authenticity against the internal data system that had previously reported a technical loss. An independent expert team was summoned, bringing recovered files from a Delta Force operative's hard drive, Logan's former teammate. The entire system began to shift. The data comparison revealed a perfect match between Dr. Henry's footage and the original body cam video once stored on the police department's server before its recent deletion. More importantly, an expanded analysis uncovered a series of at least 7 instances of data tampering and manipulation over the past 3 years. A list of victims appeared on the screen, faces of people of color, mostly men, labeled with "complaints dismissed." Those names remained as remnants of a system never openly named. Unease grew within the courtroom. Lieutenant Colonel Vernon Hale, who had appeared briefly as an independent observer during prior hearings, was called to stand for confrontation. The plaintiff's attorney presented a series of internal emails between Hale and a group of subordinate officers, including Briggs and Reynolds, revealing collusion in guiding report notes to fit procedures, accompanied by images of bank transfers to an undisclosed shadow fund. When a former officer from Briggs's rapid response team stepped up to testify, the courtroom trembled. He recounted countless unwritten orders and situations requiring firm action targeted at people of color, body cams that conveniently malfunctioned or ran out of battery at critical moments. Each word peeled away the layers of deceit within a system supposedly designed to protect civilians. Briggs and Reynolds were no longer the focus, but merely small links in a corrupt network. They lowered their heads, faces frozen as they realized they were no longer protected. The silence between them and their former backers was the clearest admission. The police legal counsel requested a recess to review and verify all data, but the judge denied the request. He declared the matter had surpassed local jurisdiction and summoned federal oversight agencies to participate starting that afternoon. Courtroom cameras captured the moment the system began to crack from within. Logan sat upright, showing no signs of triumph. His eyes quietly scanned the faces of those who once mocked, doubted, and dehumanized under the guise of law. He needed no words. Every statement had been replaced by the undeniable truth displayed before them. Behind him, Lona held his hand, not too tightly, not too loosely, like an anchor amidst the storm raging beyond the window frame. He knew this was not merely exposing a single incident. This was the beginning of a total collapse, and the real storm had only just begun. Less than an hour after the evidence was released, the media exploded with breaking news. Photos from the trial spread across social platforms. From local newspapers to national outlets, all focused on one name, David Carter. The hashtag #JusticeForDavid flooded news feeds as celebrities, lawyers, journalists, and activists shared the video alongside calls for transparency, reform, and appropriate punishment for those who manipulated the law to kill an innocent man. Victims previously oppressed by the police system began speaking out. Clips of wrongful arrests, unwarranted beatings, and fabricated reports from years past resurfaced, painting a broad picture of prolonged abuse of power. Broadcast interviews shared testimonies of grieving mothers and those humiliated in detention, turning simmering outrage into an uncontrollable wave. In the city center, hundreds gathered outside the police headquarters, holding banners reading, "We are David, End the Cover-Ups," and "Systemic Reform Now." The crowd stood orderly, their eyes quiet but resolute. Police barricades remained silent, realizing that this time the fury could not be quelled by administrative measures. Another group assembled before the city hall, demanding direct dialogue with government representatives. Within the police force, cracks began to widen. Several long-serving officers holding high ranks publicly resigned, leaving handwritten letters affirming their inability to serve in a system rotten to its core. Younger officers, especially those of color, organized an internal hearing demanding the establishment of an independent external oversight committee and a review of all civil cases dismissed in the past decade. The city police chief, known for his tough public persona, was forced to hold an emergency press conference. Facing a barrage of questions, he initially denied responsibility, claiming a few individuals acted improperly. Yet under relentless questioning, he bowed and issued a public apology to the citizens, admitting that oversight failures caused irreparable consequences. Meanwhile, Briggs and Reynolds became media targets. Reporters confronted them outside their homes, pressed them for answers in parking lots. On a rare recorded occasion, Reynolds muttered before the camera, "We were just following orders." But the defense came too late. The truth was out of control. Even their supporters could no longer defend them as evidence became overwhelmingly clear. Online public opinion is split into two extremes. One side hailed Logan as a hero, a symbol of justice and dignity in an era tainted by silence. The other, composed of extreme conservatives, condemned him as a traitor and a threat to national security, order. Logan was labeled a breaker of the neutral barrier between military and civilian life, yet most understood his actions were not fueled by hatred, but by a pain beyond human endurance. When Logan stepped out of the courthouse beside Lona, there was no loud cheer. The crowd parted to create a path, as if allowing him to walk through the very pain that had erupted into awakening. Flashbulbs popped. Questions shouted out, but he remained silent. Lona squeezed his hand firmly, lips pressed tight as if holding on to a burning faith within her chest. Logan understood that exposing the system did not mean absolute victory. What had been spilled needed to be thoroughly cleansed. The upcoming confrontation would not be in court, but where those lurking in the shadows had yet to reveal themselves. He was ready to move forward. Darkness shrouded the outskirts where streetlights barely reached. Logan stood by the dirt road's edge, eyes fixed on the mansion less than 100 meters away. Lights flickered from upstairs windows, shadows moving inside. For 3 days, Logan tracked the signal secretly placed in a document bag by a former Delta Force agent on Vernon Hale's car. Hale was erasing all traces, preparing to vanish before the system collapsed. Tonight, no one would escape. The mansion was discreetly guarded by 2 bodyguards, moving like trained soldiers. Logan silently approached, using trees as cover. In seconds, he knocked, both unconscious. The back door opened quietly. No alarm sounded. Inside, Vernon Hale sat at a large wooden table with Briggs and Reynolds. They were out of uniform but tense, surrounded by notes, hard drives, and phones. Hale ordered all data destroyed. Logan entered, the door creaking, freezing the room. No one reached for weapons. Standing barehanded, his sharp gaze silenced resistance. Hale tried to assert control, accusing Logan of illegal trespassing. Logan ignored him, revealing a recording device playing Hale's voice plotting to silence journalists and teach blacks a lesson. The words cut through the room. Reynolds, flushed, drew his gun. Logan lunged, disarming him and knocking him down. Briggs reached for a Glock. Logan shot him in the shoulder. The guards fired warning shots but were subdued. Federal agents arrived, arresting Hale, who slumped under the weight of evidence. Logan looked down at the wounded Briggs. "True justice begins when silence is broken," he said quietly. News of the raid spread quickly. Federal teams sealed the mansion, escorting Hale in handcuffs. Charges included evidence destruction, obstruction, and collusion in abuse cases. Briggs and Reynolds, once feared officers, lay guarded in hospitals facing prosecution. Senior police officials resigned amid the largest investigation in state history. Lona spoke calmly to the press. "We aim not to destroy, but to save the good left." Her words ignited a movement from outrage to reform. Logan became a justice symbol, though he declined awards and interviews. He quietly helped witnesses long been silenced. The Justice for David campaign evolved into Break the Shield, demanding transparency, mandatory body cam storage, and independent investigations. Legislators began reviewing hundreds of dismissed complaints, raising hope for real change. Returning home, Logan found his apartment unchanged. He held David's notebook, filled with small reminders. His chest tightened, feeling the weight of his brother's legacy. He was no longer just a warrior or avenger, but the bearer of justice's flame, a battle to keep truth alive beyond this victory. The federal courtroom was filled with reporters, lawyers, human rights advocates, and families marked by the system's failures. The atmosphere was solemn, awaiting a pivotal moment. The judge struck the gavel, declaring this case a landmark not only to hold individuals accountable, but to expose the police force's deep-rooted problems. The defendants sat tense, while the plaintiffs remained silent but determined. Logan sat front and center, hands clasped, expression unreadable. The indictment revealed Lieutenant Colonel Vernon Hale's crimes: manipulating data, abusing power to hide brutality, falsifying evidence, and obstructing justice. Briggs and Reynolds faced charges of second-degree murder, excessive force, and report falsification, with video and witness proof confirming their guilt. High-ranking officers involved in cover-ups were named but absent. The judge sentenced Hale to 23 years and stripped all military benefits. Briggs and Reynolds each received 18 years and lifetime bans from law enforcement. The court established a fund from confiscated assets to support victims' families. No cheers followed the verdict, only knowing glances and silent relief. David's family held hands tightly. Logan's eyes showed a quiet certainty, the torment fading. A photo of David smiling in a repair shop was displayed on screen, filling the room with reverence and overdue justice. The trial spoke with precision and truth, resonating beyond the courtroom. News of the verdict spread nationwide and internationally as a turning point for racial justice. The media compared it to historic cases like Rodney King and George Floyd. Podcasts and documentaries detailed the journey from David's death to Logan's fight for justice. The hashtag Break the Shield became a symbol on shirts and petitions demanding police reform, including mandatory body cameras and independent oversight council. Universities held seminars on the case. Logan declined public speaking invitations, but was recognized by human rights groups for his integrity and perseverance. In the town where it began, a park corner was named David Carter Green, honoring his memory. Letters and drawings from students expressed courage and hope, while veterans praised Logan for choosing life and honor. Logan avoided the spotlight, refused political runs and lucrative book deals. Instead, he founded a legal aid group supporting families wronged by the system, dedicating all funds to empower victims. When asked why he declined honors, Lona said, "Some people just want the world to stop doing wrong." Logan continued living quietly, fighting injustice away from the cameras, his actions quietly changing the system forever. Early morning sunlight slanted through the curtains, lighting the cold wooden floor. The small apartment was silent, as if the city outside had stopped breathing. Logan opened his eyes, no longer feeling the heavy pressure in his chest. It was not relief from victory, but a quiet peace after a long storm. He got out of bed, poured water, and sat by the window where a photo of David rested beside a small plant. The breeze gently moved the photo's edge. In Logan's eyes was no longer the burning fire of hatred, but deep understanding. He whispered to himself, "I no longer live in darkness." His journey replayed slowly in his mind, from secret missions in distant lands where his name was never spoken, to standing in court with the final evidence, revealing the truth about his brother's death. He once believed the hardest battle was on the battlefield. Then he realized the greater pain was removing the mask he wore his entire life and showing others he, too, felt pain, loss, and could kneel for a loved one left in the cold city. After the trial, Logan refused to return to Delta Force, despite offers of a new position and praise from his commander. He quietly folded his uniform and said, "I have fought enough. Now I must learn to stand in a crowd without clenching my fists." He began speaking with youth in detention centers about controlling emotions and the courage that lies in restraint, sharing his own struggles rather than lecturing. His life grew quieter and simpler. He adopted a small, abused dog named Truth, who learned to trust and wag its tail under Logan's care. He often told Lona, "This one has learned to live again, like me." Logan and Lona's relationship became a purposeful partnership. they founded David's Truth, a fund providing legal and psychological aid to families affected by police violence. Logan avoided public speeches, leaving that to Lona while he worked behind the scenes answering messages from parents lost in the fight for justice. Logan wrote a letter to a mother in Mississippi whose son was wrongly arrested for suspicious movement in a white neighborhood. Enclosing a photo of David smiling outside the mechanic shop, he wrote, "We cannot bring back our loved ones, but we can make sure no one else suffers. Step by step with our own wounds." The case's impact went beyond the verdict. Police departments nationwide held emergency meetings, reviewing old procedures. Some places reformed body camera policies to allow independent storage and community access. What was once internal privilege became mandatory transparency. Inspired young politicians pushed real reforms with legislative backing, and also worried. Communities organized legal workshops for youth, distributed Know Your Rights flyers, and set up online legal counseling in plain language. University sociology classes taught Logan and David's story as evidence of the cost. An international documentary, Justice Undone, featured Logan narrating softly from his living room. Young people connected not with the violence or trial, but with Logan's attitude. A man who faced injustice head-on, spoke when needed, and stayed silent when wise. His words, "Justice begins in how we treat truth every day," spread widely, inspiring graduates and activists. The story also changed how soldiers were seen. Delta Force became known not for kills or secret missions, but for asking if a trained fighter can choose to stand still for others' lives. Logan joined the Federal Ethics Oversight Council, quietly shaping decisions with wisdom born of tragedy. In McRae's Central Park, a small black stone statue was quietly erected, inscribed, "Truth cannot be erased. Justice, if slow, grows stronger when it arrives." Locals laid flowers and letters at its base. Children called it Justice's brother, referring to Logan's dog Truth, who still guarded the porch, tail softly tapping as Logan shared stories. The story closed with a new beginning. No one wished to pay with blood, but when blood was spilled, it became a guiding flame for the next generation. Logan, holding all his silence, let truth step forward, clear enough so no one could turn away again. Thank you for watching the entire story. Don't forget to like and subscribe to us. See you in the next stories.